Good morning, members. I call Committee of the Whole on Bill 44, Housing Statutes Residential Development Amendment Act 2023. And we are on Clause 5. However, the Minister would like to make an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I missed the introductions in the chamber earlier, but there is a delegation of folks here. I want to recognize Philip McKellar and Rob Berry and a whole group of folks that are in the back that are with the organization, an advocacy group called Homes for Living, and they advocate for housing options for British Columbians. And they were here today watching question period, and I think they're staying for a little while to watch this as well. So I want to welcome them here today.
Very glad you're here. Recognizing the member from Parksville, Qualicum.
Thank you, Chair.
On Clause 5.
Of course. So yesterday I asked a question regarding the holding of public hearings, and the answer I received was that we would talk about that in Clause 6. Clause 6 is a local government must not hold a public hearing on a zoning bylaw proposed for the sole purpose of complying with 481.3. Which I guess, yeah, is sort of related to that. Yeah, I've answered my own question. This is a wonderful start to things.
Yes! Shall Clause 5 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 6 pass? On Clause 6. Member?
Certainly. Now I understand the discrepancy here. Both clauses restricted the ability for local governments to hold public hearings. Originally, when the community charter, not originally, but when I was on council, councils had to hold a public hearing, and I believe there were some changes made that they had the option to or not to, depending on whether it was conforming with official community plans. And now the rule is that it cannot be held at all. One of the concerns that I raised yesterday, which was admittedly on the wrong clause, now that I give this consideration, and I appreciate staff's advice on that, is we have a project in our community that is zoned and is in the OCP as allowing 400 homes. And so the challenge is now with these new changes, these new powers under 481.3, where single-family homes are rezoned de facto to allow for 4 units, that particular project would not have an opportunity for community to provide input. And the impact on the land base between 400 homes and 1,600 homes is dramatically different. And so a question through the chair to the minister is, what are local governments supposed to do in a circumstance like this, where their official community plan has designated a community plan that is now dramatically different, a greenfield site? So unlike before, where the minister was talking about not casual infill, there was a modest infill, there was a word he used, but where it would be sort of slow to happen. This is greenfield, and so it's brand new, and all of a sudden now there's 1,600 homes that could be built here instead of 400. What is a local government supposed to do to ensure that the community has an opportunity to provide input?
Minister.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks to the member for the question. I think it's important because we're just starting the session today again, just to kind of take a step back and again talk about why we're doing this. We know that when a community has already an official community plan, that in order to get more certainty so that we can get homes built for people, we want to make sure that we're finding the most efficient way forward, and the member's correct to say many communities have already adopted this. I think it's a couple things I would say. One is that local residents still have an opportunity to connect with their elected officials if they want to, so they have an opportunity to express their views. Second, I think it's not fair to assume that every single one of those lots that was approved as a single-family home will be anything more than that, because we know that there's still a market in some communities for single-family homes, so they may very well be built. But now they have the opportunity to have, depending on the size of the lot, 3 or 4 units to be built on it. Now the community, because of this legislation, will have to go back and use a standardized housing needs report and update their official community plan. And so there is an opportunity for the community to revisit what the community plan looks like overall going forward. But I think it's vitally important that we find ways to get housing built. And what we know is that when a single family home is being built, there are options of creating different ways of housing for folks within that unit.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And this clause is specific about the holding of public hearings. We all agree, everybody in this House, that we need more supply. We've canvassed this before, that CMHC has said that we need 610,000 units of supply. The Minister admitted yesterday that this plan, this Act and the other plans that are in place has a huge gap, and that will not get us to where CMHC is saying that we need to go. Yesterday, the Minister mentioned the BC Green Party as having a plan, and their plan showed that it was meeting the CMHC targets. But what I really want to focus on is the inability to hold a public hearing for projects that are taking place. And so I guess the question through the Chair to the Minister is, if the OCP designates this area, as it does in our community, for 400 units, they're going through that process. If there's already been agreements made for DCCs, if there's already been agreements made as far as parkland dedication that are now dramatically inadequate, I mean, the Minister states that single families still have a market. I agree, but the highest and best use for greenfield land is going to be determined by the economics. And 4 units is going to make a lot more sense on a greenfield site than 1 unit will. And so the question is, again, what opportunity will a community have for input on a project like this that is now dramatically larger than was originally proposed, and how will their voices be heard in a public way?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's also important to note that projects that are outside of the OCP will still have public hearings for those that are watching at home. I think if the concern from the community is, if the concern from the local government is issues around infrastructure, et cetera, there is provisions in the legislation for them to look at whether the infrastructure is adequate for the housing that's going to be built there, and then they have to have a plan to be able to get that infrastructure there. So we do find ways to address that challenge, but what I see in my community, and a member can speak to his community, is we have single-family homes that have 10 people living in them. In fact, I know of single-family homes that have 18 people living in them. And so, if you have that structure, that infrastructure built, the member says he's got one that's got 25. That's great. Multi-generational families living together is a good thing. Now, that being said, that infrastructure need is already there with those housing units. And so it is my opinion that the demand on the infrastructure is not much higher than it is for single-family homes. And so local governments will have to navigate that. If they feel there's infrastructure challenges that comes with that, they have the ability within the legislation to act accordingly.
Member.
I feel like it's a race to the bottom about who knows who has the most number of people living in a home, and it's we want to make sure that we've got suitable housing for people in our communities. People deserve to have a safe place to live, and I applaud government for making bold moves to try to advance these goals. So I'm not challenging this at all. I'm just trying to use specific examples. So this clause is specific about public hearings, a project that's going through a zoning process. So yes, the DCCs can be brought in. It's a bit complicated because generally early on is when that conversation takes place, and sometimes these are midway. I guess the concern is for a project like this that an OCP has designated 400 units, and we are now seeing an application come forward for 4 times that many units. There is no additional parkland dedication. The 5% is 5%. That is in statute what is set aside. The community, the nearby community, is going to see dramatic impact from what was previously agreed to as a community as 400 units in a nodal space to now 1,600 units. It creates pressure, and traffic can be accommodated. Form of character, this gets rid of that. I'm less worried about that. I'm more concerned about the impacts on things like our natural environment, park space, and the amenities that people expect. This clause takes away the public's opportunity to provide input on projects that could have dramatic impacts on the community. The minister has said that there are other ways that members of the community can interact with members of council to make sure that their voices are heard. Local governments also have the power through Committee of the Whole and other public forums to do this. I just want to get on the record, and I don't need an answer from the minister, I just want to get on the record the concern I have for my community, where I can see an immediate response of this, which is an area that is currently in the OCP for 400 homes. That will now see 1,600 homes. It will have a tremendous impact on the community, and members of the community will no longer have a public place to share those views. And with that, I can let the minister move on to the next clause.
Shall Clause 6 pass?
No.
Oh, my apologies. House Leader of the third party, recognizing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to, I think it's important to raise a note here, and, the minister just said that in his opinion, the infrastructure is, and you'll have to pardon me if I don't get this quote exactly right, is not much different for a single-family home than it would be for a multifamily development. This, of course, is far from the truth, because the reality of it is that the infrastructure isn't just what plugs into the house. The infrastructure is a long network of often very complicated services that are delivered by multiple different governments. High-pressure pipes supply community distribution for water. Community collection feed high-pressure pipes to remove septic, wastewater. Roads have a capacity. All of this has a capacity. And so an analysis should have been done, it was not done, or if it was done, it's not being made available to us on the impact of infrastructure. I asked this question a long time, and I want to note how concerning it is to hear the minister say it's not much different. It has dramatic differences. In fact, the water supply, for an example, the wastewater removal availability for the community of Sartlip there's a cap. There's only so much that we can take or put into the system. And if there is a dramatic increase, or even a less than dramatic increase, as the minister suggests, as he suggests that this is going to be a big increase and then says, no, it's not going to be a big increase in the same breath, the impact is huge. And all those pipes, all that road that's on, this is exactly the reason why I asked the minister to demonstrate that there was some basic analysis done on the impact, so that the day 3, he doesn't stand up in here and say, there's little difference between what's needed for a single-family home and what's needed for a multifamily home. Of course, when all those multifamily homes plug into the same system, then you get brownouts when it comes to hydro, you get backups when it comes to sewer, you get water systems that are not scoped to be enough because they didn't build a high enough wall at the Souk River Reservoir. And unless that there is an actual planning process behind that, then really what we're talking about from this minister is more of what I've been criticizing that this bill is based on, is magical thinking. Magically, we're going to get the infrastructure that's needed in order to be able to support the housing. And if we don't, then what this amounts to is a victory lap for a minister and not more housing in our communities. And that is really unfortunate, Madam Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you. And I appreciate the members made his opposition noted, and I appreciate that. What I would say, I respectfully listen to the member. I'd expect that he would do the same for other members of this place. Now, we have said that, of course, we need to continue to invest in infrastructure. Of course, we need to continue to invest in amenities. I've highlighted the $1 billion that we provided local governments this year. The federal government's coming in with their housing accelerator funding. We need to do more. No one is saying that we don't invest further in amenities and infrastructure. Of course, we need that. Now, what I did refer to earlier, the comment I made, is from a Metro Vancouver report that the study confirmed that more compact development forms tend to reduce infrastructure costs on a per capita basis, support a more efficient use of resources, and encourages more cost-effective forms of transportation. So that's what I was referring to. And again, within the legislation, if there is serious water concerns or serious issues around the infrastructure, there's provisions for local governments to be able to adapt to that as well. And so, you know, that's what I was referring to when I made those comments.
Member.
Thank you. And as someone who sat around those tables, there is absolutely no doubt that the infrastructure that we have under our communities at the current level of single-family development in many of these sprawl communities is underutilized. I agree with that statement. 100%, we've got far more infrastructure with less people putting into it. I agree. However, the reality is that when you build more density on top of the community level infrastructure that I'm talking about, it requires the capacity all the way through the network, which is not being considered in the comment that was made. That's a basic planning principle. You learn that in year 1 or year 2 of being a councillor, that we have a certain capacity in our infrastructure, and at some point you're over capacity. And without an analysis of that, and without a plan that's more than, like, honestly, like I said yesterday, there's hundreds of millions, there's billions of dollars in an infrastructure deficit that this and previous governments haven't resolved. They haven't provided the funding. The amenity package that's coming for us to debate likely next week isn't enough either. So the minister is right that we should be putting density on top of infrastructure that's already there. It makes no sense to put new infrastructure in the ground. However, it's not correct to just assume that we can make up numbers here, 3, 4, and 6, and multiply that over a neighborhood, because the reality is that the engineers can't plan for the lowest number that might come. The engineers must always plan for the highest number that this minister is creating in this bill. So there's a reality here that is not matching the reality on the ground. And that is, we can make up whatever numbers we want in here, but on the ground, they need to find a way to be able to deliver it. And that's the point that I'm making with this.
Minister.
Okay, I appreciate the member's points. I'll add to my earlier comments that the same study found that higher density forms of development are more cost-effective in urban developed areas where public infrastructure investments can be best utilized. Also found that achieving compact, complete communities does not necessarily require extremely high density development forms. For example, moving from low density to medium density in urban centers and along transit corridors can provide significant improvements in infrastructure services at cost outcomes. And so I appreciate what the member is saying, but I'm just saying I disagree with some of the statements that he's made.
Recognizing the member from Parksville, Qualicum.
Thank you, Chair. 2 other quick questions. That's a famous, sorry, to the member from West Vancouver, Capilano, on this clause. Were local governments consulted on this change to remove public hearings specifically for this new 481.3 zoning bylaw?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. There was extensive consultation when it comes to DAPR, which is part of this, around public hearings. There was extensive consultation done around making it allowable for local governments to opt in when they need to opt in. And so what we've seen from that that movement informed our decision here.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. That wasn't the question. The question was, were local governments consulted on the strict forbiddance of a local government to not have a public hearing to comply with this new small-scale multifamily housing?
Minister.
Yes, we consulted local governments through UBCM.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. And did UBCM as a body recommend that for these small-scale multifamily housing developments that public hearings be prohibited?
Minister.
Staff informed me that the views were mixed from UBCM members.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So government consulted with UBCM specifically on public hearings, the prohibition of holding public hearings to comply with Section 481.3, and UBCM was mixed on whether that was to be a good policy or not. Have developers recommended that public hearings be prohibited for this type of housing?
Minister.
I did not speak to any developers regarding this. UBCM was engaged on the legislation. The position of UBCM was that their members had concerns, but we spoke to many local governments as well who thought it was a positive decision, and so that's why I made my comment that the views certainly were mixed.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got the list of local governments that were consulted and represented, and I've got a list of developers and nonprofit sector representatives. And so the minister has stated that this lack of public hearing was consulted with UBCM, and that some members of, I'm assuming the executive of UBCM agreed and some disagreed. Not sure what that ratio is. I'm not sure. I don't want to get into this person's name or that person's name. But obviously a mixed response. But so, just for clarity, so this list of developer and nonprofit sector representatives that the minister provided earlier, as far as consultation on this legislation, they were not consulted on the change to public hearings, just to confirm.
Minister.
That is correct.
Shall Clause 6 pass? Aye. On Clause 7? So ordered. On Clause 7, member.
Yeah, so this clause prohibits, I'm just trying to remember from reading this from last week. I guess what is the purpose of publicly disclosing in a newspaper for a 2-week period about a zoning change if there is no opportunity for the public to provide input on that change?
Minister.
Thanks to the member for the question. It's an opportunity to still remain informed of what's happening. We know that many communities, for example, in my community, they were one of the early adopters of this, and they still set up a website. They still put up information. They allowed people to send online comments so that the staff could take that feedback when they have conversations with the development, and so that's why that's there.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just considering the impact on local government. So councils essentially cannot vote down. They must, as we'll discuss later in this bill, they must accept these rezoning applications. There is no public hearing. We're expecting to see, hopefully in communities across this province, some infill development. It just seems an onerous ordeal for local governments every time somebody comes in to put an ADU or to add a suite to their space. If they have to go through that rezoning process, if we are accepting that in British Columbia there is no such thing as single-family homes zoning, I'm not saying no single-family homes, I don't want anyone to have that misconception, but if we're saying that the base zoning in British Columbia is essentially 4 units, when local governments go through this process again and again to rezone to allow for, as I said, accessory dwelling units or these other triplexes, is it not redundant to force local governments to disclose twice in the newspaper for every one of these projects?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I think maybe I'll clarify for the member. This was already in the Act before. And so what we're saying is that with this section, that if something does not fit within the OCP, which requires still a public hearing, that they should continue to do it. So this is not a major change. When there's something that is not within the OCP, they can continue to publicly share that information with the public.
Member.
Yeah, I'm all for transparency. I'm just wondering what the intention was, though. If we are essentially saying that every lot can allow for 4 units, I'm just wondering why it is that government is still requiring local governments to disclose that if they are rezoning. You know, if governments do not allow for accessory dwelling units in their communities, every time somebody wants to do one, they have to do a rezoning. There's no opportunity for public input. I'm just wondering why, if government is saying that the base in BC is four homes per lot, why are we requiring councils to go through the process of publicly disclosing this in this way?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll take a step back. This piece is not only for SSMU. This piece is for entire community, official community plans. And so what we're saying here is, we're not saying that they're only required if it's outside of the OCP. So that's what we're saying. So maybe I'm misunderstanding it. The members, it's a consequential amendment. It's not a major change or reform to the bill at all.
Shall Clause 7 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 8 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 9 pass? On Clause 9, recognizing the member from Parksville-Qualicum.
Thank you, Chair. I won't tell members here how many questions I have because I haven't been consistent with keeping to that number. This clause, would it not make irrelevant the land use bylaws referenced in Clause 2 and Clause 3?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. No, it doesn't.
Shall Clause 9 pass? Aye. So ordered. Shall Clause 10? On Clause 10, recognizing the member from West Van Capilano. If you wish to remain seated for your questioning, I'm welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. Oh, and Hansard probably appreciates my making a. Is it for up right now? Can I stand? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I'm good right now. So to the Minister, we're moving from at least 5 years to 20 years now for OCPs. Can the Minister, through the Chair, explain why that number was chosen?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the member for the question. So it aligns with planning best practices, but also it also aligns with regional growth strategies, and they use the same structure for that.
Member.
Thank you to the Minister. I've heard from a number of communities who have actually just finished OCPs, particularly small communities who have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on doing this, and now everything has changed and they've got to go back into a new process. What would the Minister say to those communities, and is there any way that they can be supported with the financial burden that this is going to bring upon them?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And no, I appreciate the point the member's making. So that's why we've got the 51 million, but that's also why we've put a 2-year window in for local governments, because we understand that they'll be in different stages.
Member.
Thank you to the minister. So I know there was discussion about that 51 million yesterday, but so is what I just described the scenario of needing support for paying for OCPs, or that would be something that they would be able to draw upon the $51 million for?
Yes,
Minister?
yes, that's correct.
Member.
Thank you again to the minister. Now, this might blend into Clause 11, but I think there's been a lot of leeway in terms of asking questions related to the clause that we're on. Recently, within the last, in some communities, 30, 60 days, there have been negotiations with the communities that have been deemed to be on the naughty list, the 10 communities that were initially identified as not appropriately maintaining their housing stock. And so the minister has met with those communities and has negotiated, I guess, agreements with them individually. That is my understanding. I stand to be corrected if that is not the case. There has been little, if any, information publicly in terms of how the numbers were determined for each one of these communities. I don't believe government has released that information or has committed to release that information. But can the minister explain to us how those housing targets that have been imposed upon these communities, how those then relate to Bill 44 and the density that is being directed through this? It feels at this point that there's a lot of different things going on. And so how do those targets marry into what we're talking about in Bill 44?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So both the housing needs reports and the targets use the same methodology when they're calculating the housing needs. And so these, all of the legislation that we've brought forward will help those communities, but also all communities able to address their housing needs.
Member.
Thank you to the minister. If I might ask the minister then, what was the purpose of going through that exercise of meeting with those communities, very publicly shaming them, providing these housing targets to them, and then saying, well, it's the same thing as what we're doing in the housing planning now?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Chair. And as my friends across the way canvassed last 2 days from Parksville, the reforms that we've made here itself won't just solve the challenges of housing across the board. It's an important piece. It will help us get along the way, but communities will need to do more. And I wouldn't say public shaming. I know that members have. I've never referred to it the way that the member across the way referred to it. I've always said these are communities that we want to work with. That's why when we actually came out with a list and we announced the communities, we had many of the mayors standing with us because they know I've never referred to anyone with terms other than these are communities where there's opportunities for more housing to be provided.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I presume then that the naughty list was something that was derived by media as opposed to the minister then. Is that on the record? If I might just then confirm with the minister that those targets that were provided to those or imposed upon those communities, they do not conflict in any way with Bill 44 and what's happening now.
Minister.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll put on the record it was Jas Johal that said it. And so Hansard will capture that forever.
It'll be on his show later today.
Yeah, it's gonna be on his show later today. Yeah, and the member is correct that this enables and supports them to be able to reach their targets.
Shall clause, on clause 10, recognizing the member from Parksville Qualicum.
Yeah, This is kind of pedantic. I mean, it's, so repealing section 2.1 under clause 10, it's then added under 473.1. I can ask this question now or the next clause. I'm just wondering which municipalities are currently excluded under that clause.
Member, if you can repeat the question, please, that would be great.
Certainly. So clause 10, sub B, says it's repealing subsection 2.1. That subsection allows for an exemption. I believe it's 585.11 that exempts a community from being within this clause. It's just being re-added in clause 11. I'm just wondering which communities were captured by that exclusion.
Minister?
Thank you. Lytton is the only municipality that's captured in that.
Minister noting the hour.
Thank you so much, Chair. I move the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Members, shoot, I've lost one. Members, the question is that the committee rise, report progress, and seek leave to sit again. Those in favor indicate aye. Those opposed indicate nay. Motion is carried. This committee stands adjourned.